Today's video will show you the most horrifying snake attacks ever recorded in history. From an amateur snake expert tracking a massive female anaconda, to a bulldozer operator who decided to pick up a banded snake with his bare hands. It was September 21st, 2014, in rural Queensland, Australia. The evening was humid and it had rained earlier. Storm clouds were overhead. From the farmhouse, the property looked calm. But on one edge of the land, something dangerous was about to happen. Luke McAdams was 29 years old and had worked as a farmhand on his family's property for most of his life. He lived with his partner and was responsible for taking care of the fields, livestock, and buildings. Beyond farm work, he was interested in snakes, especially pythons, which he kept in a small area near the edge of the property. Recently, he had gotten a 12-foot carpet python, which was unusually large even for that type of snake. Luke had spent weeks getting it used to its new home, feeding it and watching its behavior. He thought he could handle it safely. Though he had some experience, he sometimes took unnecessary risks, including checking on the snakes at night when it was hard to see. That night, Luke wanted to check on his snakes before the rain came back. He had already noticed minor scratches on his arms from handling the python earlier in the week, but he thought they were no big deal. His partner had told him to secure the enclosures properly and suggested waiting until daylight. But Luke ignored the advice. He wanted to make sure the snakes were fed and accounted for. He underestimated how stormy conditions could make the ground slippery and make it harder to access the outdoor pens. The enclosure area was an open space with a dirt floor that was muddy from earlier rain. The fence was low and reinforced with wire mesh. Each tank and pen had branches, rocks, and hiding spots for the snakes, but space was cramped and crowded. Light rain was falling, making surfaces slippery under the dim outdoor lights. The 12-foot carpet python's pen had a metal latch that was slightly bent from previous use. Its grip was weakened just enough that a moment of not paying attention could allow the snake to escape. Carpet pythons are non-venomous constrictors that can subdue prey by wrapping their muscular bodies around it. A large python of this size can immobilize an adult human over several minutes, gradually increasing pressure with each coil. Usually they avoid confrontation, biting only defensively, and constriction becomes effective slowly rather than instantly. Wrong moves, loud movements, or startled reactions can cause defensive strikes from even well-adjusted snakes. Earlier that evening, neighbors had seen Luke moving between pens in the dark. They saw him lean over the large python's enclosure and occasionally inspect the latches. Stormy weather made the ground slippery, limiting safe footing. The latch on the python's enclosure was slightly bent and loose, enough that a startled snake could push it open, though Luke did not notice the problem. At around 9 p.m., Luke bent down to check the python's water dish. His foot slipped in the mud, causing him to stumble forward. The slight movement was enough to startle the python. It slipped past the weakened latch and rose from the pen with a low hiss, initially coiling around his lower legs. Luke tried to step back, but the wet ground made him slip, and the snake tightened gradually as he struggled. The neighbors, watching from their farmhouse a few hundred feet away, could make out Luke's shape moving strangely and heard muffled calls, but the low light and distance prevented them from seeing any details of the struggle. The python gradually moved higher as Luke struggled, restricting his arm movements and compressing his chest over several minutes. Mud splashed, branches rustled, and his flashlight fell to the ground. The snake's actions were deliberate and defensive, responding to sudden motion and noise, not hunting. Slowly, Luke found it harder to breathe and move, the constrictor's strength increasing with each coil. By the time his partner reached the enclosure with a flashlight and shouted for help, Luke was completely unable to move. Attempts to manually pull the python off without proper tools were dangerous and often caused the snake to tighten its grip further. The snake remained coiled defensively around him. Emergency animal authorities were called, and when they arrived, they killed the python to safely recover his body. The scene showed the python's coils had wrapped progressively, with the ground churned in mud and water. Minor scratches on his arms and legs matched prior handling incidents, and disturbed plants showed the struggle had been real and went on for a while. The aftermath led to the temporary closure of the property's snake collection. Inspectors documented all enclosures, latches, and pens. Recommendations were made for secure containment, nighttime handling precautions, and additional training for anyone working with large constrictors. It was August 3rd, 2015, and the Orlando Convention Center buzzed with the controlled chaos of the Southeast Reptile Expo, one of the largest gatherings of snake enthusiasts, breeders, and dealers in the region. Hundreds of vendors had set up elaborate displays showcasing everything from harmless corn snakes to exotic venomous species that commanded premium prices from experienced collectors. The air conditioning struggled against the combined heat of thousands of visitors and hundreds of warming lamps, creating a humid atmosphere that reminded everyone of the tropical origins of many displayed species. Vincent Russo, known throughout the reptile community simply as Vinny, had been working the exotic animal trade for 15 years, building a reputation as someone who could acquire almost any species for the right price. At 39, he operated on the fringes of legality, often selling dangerous species to inexperienced buyers who were attracted by his aggressive sales tactics and willingness to overlook proper documentation and safety requirements. Vinny's business model relied on cutting corners wherever possible to maximize profits, a practice that extended to his handling procedures and safety equipment. Witnesses at previous expos had observed him rushing through transactions and skipping proper protocols when he thought he could get away with it, according to investigation notes gathered after the incident. That afternoon, Vinny was managing multiple high-value transactions simultaneously, including the sale of a monocled cobra to a collector who had been waiting months for the opportunity to acquire such a rare specimen. The buyer had traveled from Georgia specifically for this purchase and had expressed urgency about completing the transaction before other dealers could interfere. Monocled cobras are among Asia's most dangerous venomous snakes, possessing potent neurotoxic venom that attacks the nervous system and can cause respiratory failure within hours. These large serpents can reach lengths of over 6 feet and are known for their defensive hood display and readiness to bite when threatened. Their venom contains powerful neurotoxins that cause progressive paralysis, and bites from large specimens can prove fatal without immediate medical intervention and appropriate anti-venom treatment. The busy expo environment had created additional stress for many of the animals on display, and several vendors reported seeing the monocled cobra making restless movements inside its transport container throughout the afternoon. Several handlers noted brief hooding and repeated repositioning inside the container, behavior consistent with a stressed and defensive cobra. Others later told investigators that Vinny had been rushing to complete multiple high-value sales before closing time, moving quickly between transactions while ignoring the usual safety precautions he was known to skip when the expo was busy. Instead of using the proper hooks and restraint equipment that experienced handlers considered essential for transferring venomous species, Vinny decided to save time by attempting a quick hand-to-hand transfer behind his vendor table, away from public view. Investigation notes revealed that his years of experience had made him overconfident about his ability to handle dangerous snakes without proper safety measures. The monocled cobra bit Vinny on the wrist as he attempted to grasp it behind the head. Investigators later noted that the depth of the paired punctures or faint scrape marks and the rapid onset of symptoms suggested a significant envenomation, possibly involving brief fang contact before the snake pulled away. Within the first hour, Vinny began experiencing early signs of neurotoxic effects, slurred speech and growing weakness, symptoms consistent with moderate to high-volume cobra envenomations, which he initially dismissed as fatigue from the long expo day. Investigators noted this was on the faster end of expected onset for monocled cobra envenomations, likely influenced by the snake's stress level and the close-range contact during the bite. Vendor statements indicated that he continued working for another hour, not wanting to lose the substantial sales he had lined up for the remainder of the expo. As the venom circulated, his symptoms steadily worsened over the next couple of hours, progressing to pronounced muscle weakness and loss of coordination. By approximately the third hour after the bite, Vinny collapsed at his vendor booth as his respiratory function began to deteriorate. The crowded aisles and limited access behind vendor tables slowed the arrival of paramedics, and the exact species involved was not confirmed until staff reached Vinny's booth, delaying the call for appropriate antivenom. The specialized antivenom required for monocled cobra bites was kept at a regional zoo rather than local hospitals, and response teams noted that transport time made immediate treatment impossible. Regional hospitals typically do not stock antivenom for non-native elapids, requiring reliance on zoo or research facility inventories. Vinny died before effective treatment could be administered, his body unable to withstand the progressive respiratory failure caused by the cobra's neurotoxic venom. The incident sent shockwaves through the Reptile Expo community and led to immediate revisions in handling protocols and booth inspection requirements for vendors working with venomous species. The investigation documented multiple past complaints about Vinny's handling practices, including missing restraint tools and incomplete transaction paperwork found at his booth. His death prompted expos in the region to adopt stricter vendor inspections and mandatory venomous species handling protocols. It was June 22, 2014, and the rural farmlands of East Texas stretched endlessly under the evening sky as Jake Morrison drove his pickup truck along dusty back roads toward his final service call of the day. The 29-year-old wildlife removal specialist had been working since dawn, responding to calls from farmers and homeowners dealing with unwanted animal visitors on their properties. Jake operated a small wildlife control business that served the rural communities scattered across East Texas, an area where encounters between humans and dangerous wildlife were common. He had 5 years of experience removing common species like raccoons, opossums, and non-venomous snakes, but his training with venomous species was limited. Financial pressures from his recent marriage had forced Jake to accept jobs he wasn't fully qualified for, including calls involving potentially dangerous snakes. The call had come from a local farmer who reported finding a colorful snake in his chicken coop. Jake was rushing to complete multiple service calls in one day to maximize his income, a practice that often led to careless mistakes. He carried basic equipment in his truck, but lacked the specialized tools and training necessary for safely handling venomous species. The nearest hospital was 45 minutes away through rural back roads, and Jake had no access to antivenom or emergency medical support. Texas coral snakes are among North America's most venomous species, possessing a potent neurotoxic venom that attacks the nervous system and causes respiratory paralysis. They are small, secretive snakes that are often confused with harmless species like the scarlet king snake, leading to dangerous misidentifications. Coral snakes have a distinctive banding pattern of red, yellow, and black rings, but the traditional rhyme used to identify them can be unreliable under poor lighting conditions or stress. Their venom contains powerful neurotoxins that cause muscle paralysis and respiratory failure, making immediate medical treatment essential for survival. Jake arrived at the farm just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the property that made visibility poor. The farmer led him to the chicken coop where he had spotted the snake, describing it as having bright red, yellow, and black bands. In the dim lighting of the coop, Jake examined the snake and attempted to identify it using the Red Touches Black, friend of Jack Rhyme, which proved unreliable under the poor lighting conditions. The poor lighting and Jake's fatigue from a long day of work led him to misidentify the Texas coral snake as a harmless scarlet king snake. This fatal mistake caused Jake to handle the snake without gloves or proper restraint equipment, believing he was dealing with a non-venomous species that posed no threat to his safety. Jake reached down and grasped the snake behind its head, intending to remove it from the chicken coop and relocate it to a more appropriate habitat. The snake initially remained calm, but as Jake continued handling it and applied pressure while trying to secure his grip, the coral snake became defensive and bit him on the thumb. It started to clamp down and chewed for several seconds before its small fangs penetrated the skin and injected a dose of potent neurotoxic venom. Jake immediately realized his mistake as he looked more closely at the snake's banding pattern in better light. The distinctive red bands touching yellow bands clearly identified the snake as a venomous coral snake, not the harmless king snake he had thought he was handling. Jake released the snake and examined the small puncture wounds on his thumb, knowing that he had just received a potentially dangerous envenomation. Jake rushed to his truck and began the 45-minute drive to the nearest hospital, but panic and distraction from the snake bite caused him to drive erratically. His anxiety about the envenomation and fatigue from his long workday impaired his concentration and judgment behind the wheel. Jake's vision became affected by stress and fear as he worried about the venom's effects, making it increasingly difficult to focus on driving safely. 20 minutes into his desperate race to reach medical help, Jake's panic and exhaustion caused him to lose control of his pickup truck on a sharp curve. He crashed into a roadside ditch, the impact rendering him unconscious. Jake remained trapped in his vehicle for several hours before being discovered, during which time the coral snake venom continued its progression through his system. The farmer found Jake's crashed truck 3 hours later when he went to check on the wildlife removal specialist who had failed to return for payment. By the time emergency responders extracted Jake from the wreckage and transported him to the hospital, the neurotoxic venom had caused severe respiratory depression. Jake died from respiratory failure several hours after the bite, as the rural hospital lacked the ventilatory support equipment necessary to maintain his breathing until anti-venom could be obtained. The investigation revealed that Jake had misidentified a deadly coral snake as a harmless species, leading to his fatal envenomation. The delayed discovery of his crash and the lack of immediate respiratory support contributed to the tragic outcome. His death highlighted the dangers faced by wildlife control operators who lack proper training and equipment for handling venomous species. It was July 2nd, 2017, when the rugged terrain of the Santa Catalina Mountains in Arizona became the setting for a fatal encounter that would underscore the inherent dangers faced by those who work in remote wilderness areas. Blair Sutton, a 41-year-old trail maintenance contractor, had been working the summer season in the Santa Catalina Mountains for over 6 years. His job involved maintaining hiking trails, clearing debris, and ensuring safe passage for visitors. Blair was known among his colleagues for his efficiency and practical approach to his work, often taking shortcuts between designated work zones to maximize productivity. Recent years had brought noticeable changes to Blair's physical condition. His stamina had decreased, and he experienced occasional fatigue during long workdays in the mountain terrain. Blair attributed these symptoms to the natural effects of aging and the physical demands of his outdoor profession. Unknown to him, these symptoms indicated chronic kidney disease that had been progressing for several years, a condition that would prove critical in the events that followed. The summer of 2017 had been particularly challenging for trail workers. Arizona's monsoon season had arrived early and brought increased wildlife activity. The combination of higher humidity and sporadic rainfall created ideal conditions for reptiles to become more active. Local park rangers had issued multiple warnings about increased snake sightings along popular trails. Blair had been assigned to work on a section connecting two popular popular hiking areas, requiring him to traverse approximately 3 miles of challenging terrain. His supervisor had reminded him to stay on designated paths, but Blair's experience and confidence often led him to take more direct routes. The black-tailed rattlesnake, scientifically known as Crotalus molossus, represents a medically significant venomous species commonly found in the mountainous regions of the American Southwest. While generally less aggressive than some rattlesnake species, the black-tailed rattlesnake possesses medically significant hemotoxic venom containing enzymes and proteins designed to break down tissue and disrupt blood clotting. The venom causes progressive tissue destruction and severe swelling, and while rarely fatal, with prompt treatment, can lead to life-threatening complications including shock and severe dehydration in remote wilderness situations. These serpents are ambush predators that rely heavily on their exceptional camouflage to remain undetected. Their coloration blends perfectly with the rocky surfaces and shadows found throughout their mountainous habitat. The species often seeks shelter beneath rock ledges during the heat of the day. As Blair worked through his assigned section on the afternoon of July 2nd, he encountered a particularly challenging area where recent storm damage had created significant obstacles. Rather than following the circuitous official route around the damaged area, Blair made the decision to cut directly across a steep rocky slope at approximately 2:30 p.m. The rocky terrain in this remote section blocked all cell phone signals. Blair's radio had limited range, and his location was over 2 miles from the nearest maintained trail where other workers might pass. The isolation that made this area pristine also made it extraordinarily dangerous for anyone facing a medical emergency. As Blair carefully picked his way across the rocky slope, his focus was primarily on maintaining his footing on the loose terrain. The excellent camouflage provided by the rocky environment meant that he failed to notice the black-tailed rattlesnake that had taken shelter beneath a large rock ledge directly in his path. The snake, measuring approximately 4 feet in length, had positioned itself in the cool shade beneath the ledge to escape the mounting afternoon heat. As Blair stepped closer to the ledge, his movement caused loose rocks to tumble down the slope, alerting the snake to the approaching threat. Cornered beneath the rock ledge with no escape route, the startled black-tailed rattlesnake struck defensively without the typical warning rattle that might have alerted Blair to its presence. The serpent's fangs, measuring approximately half an inch, found their mark at the boot collar, where leather met fabric, penetrating the thin material and delivering venom into the soft tissue above his ankle. The initial bite lasted approximately 2 seconds, delivering a substantial envenomation. The venom immediately began its destructive work, attacking blood cells and blood vessel walls, while preventing normal clotting mechanisms from functioning properly. The snake quickly withdrew and disappeared into the rocky crevices. Blair immediately felt intense burning pain radiating from the bite site as the venom began breaking down tissue at the cellular level. Within the first hour, his ankle began to swell dramatically, and the characteristic dual puncture wounds became clearly visible. The hemotoxic venom caused progressive tissue destruction around the bite site, leading to severe bruising and discoloration that spread up his leg. Despite the severity of his situation, Blair attempted to make his way toward the main trail where he could seek help. However, this decision proved critical in accelerating the spread of venom throughout his system. The physical exertion of walking across difficult terrain, combined with elevated heart rate caused by pain and stress, increased his circulation and caused the venom to spread more rapidly. By 4 p.m., approximately 1.5 hours after the bite, Blair began experiencing systemic symptoms as the venom reached his vital organs. The hemotoxic compounds caused widespread damage to blood vessels throughout his leg, leading to massive swelling and fluid accumulation. His leg swelled dramatically as compartment syndrome developed, dangerous pressure building within the confined space of his lower leg. The venom's assault on his muscle tissue released large amounts of proteins into his bloodstream. Combined with his pre-existing kidney disease, his compromised compromised kidneys struggled to filter the toxic breakdown products. Blair experienced severe nausea and dizziness as his body struggled to cope with the massive tissue damage and the toxic load circulating through his system. By 6 p.m., nearly 4 hours after the initial bite, the combination of massive fluid loss into damaged tissues, severe dehydration from the desert heat, and the stress on his already compromised kidneys began causing severe shock. His blood pressure dropped significantly as his cardiovascular system struggled to maintain circulation while dealing with massive internal fluid shifts and dehydration. Blair's attempts to reach help became increasingly desperate as his strength failed. The remote location meant that even if he had managed to activate his radio, rescue teams would have faced significant challenges reaching his position before dark. As the desert night fell and temperatures dropped, Blair's condition continued to deteriorate. The combination of severe dehydration, massive fluid loss into damaged tissues, and the overwhelming stress on his compromised kidney function created a cascade of life-threatening complications. By midnight, approximately 9.5 hours after the initial envenomation, Blair collapsed in a rocky ravine, still over a mile from the main trail. Blair succumbed to complications from untreated envenomation during the early morning hours of July 3rd, approximately 14 hours after the initial bite. The primary cause of death was severe shock from dehydration and massive fluid loss into damaged tissues, compounded by his pre-existing kidney disease, which prevented his body from properly managing the toxic breakdown products from muscle damage. Blair's body was discovered the following morning by a search team dispatched when he failed to return to the ranger station. The investigation revealed that he had deviated from the designated trail system, taking a shortcut across terrain known to harbor venomous snakes during peak activity periods. His death prompted immediate changes to safety protocols for trail maintenance workers, including mandatory GPS tracking devices, improved communication equipment, and revised procedures prohibiting solo work in remote areas during the summer months when snake activity peaks. It was October 19th, 2017, and the afternoon sun hung heavy over the acacia-dotted plains outside Nairobi, casting long shadows across the dusty compound where Jabari Ndeti was about to make the last mistake of his life. The German tourists had been asking about dangerous animals all morning, their cameras ready, their excitement palpable, and Jabari, always eager to deliver a story worth retelling, decided to give them something they would never forget. Jabari Ndeti was a 34-year-old freelance safari guide who had built his reputation on spectacle rather than safety. Unlike the guides employed by the established tour companies with their standardized protocols and insurance requirements, Jabari operated independently, taking clients who wanted experiences that felt raw and unfiltered. He was known around Nairobi's budget safari circuit as the guide who would get you close to the action, the one who didn't just talk about wildlife, but interacted with it. His colleagues considered him reckless. His clients thought he was fearless. He had handled snakes before, puff adders, cobras, even a python once, always without incident, which had likely reinforced his belief in his own abilities. This trip was supposed to be straightforward, a day tour for 4 German tourists who had specifically requested him after hearing of his previous demonstrations. The compound where Jabari operated sat on the outskirts of the city, a collection of corrugated metal structures and dusty yards where he kept various animals for educational purposes, though many of these holdings were illegal under Kenyan wildlife regulations. He lived in a small room behind the main building, his income unpredictable but occasionally lucrative when tourists tipped well. His colleagues heard previously that his goal was to save enough to start a legitimate safari company. But for now, he relied on word of mouth and the kind of performances that made people reach for their wallets. The wooden crate sat in the shade of the main building, its contents known only to Jabari and a few other local guides who had warned him repeatedly about keeping it. Black mambas are among Africa's most feared snakes, and for good reason. They can grow up to 14 feet long and are among the fastest snakes, capable of rapid bursts of movement that exceed human reaction time. Their venom is a potent neurotoxin capable of delivering a large, potentially fatal dose in a single effective bite, leading primarily to progressive paralysis of the respiratory muscles. Without antivenom, the mortality rate is extremely high, with death often occurring over several hours as paralysis advances and breathing fails. They are notoriously defensive when cornered and may strike rapidly if provoked. When the German tourists asked about dangerous wildlife, Jabari saw an opportunity. He had shown them photographs, described encounters, but their expressions showed they wanted more. One of them, a man in his 50s, asked if Jabari had ever actually handled a dangerous snake. Jabari smiled and told them to wait. He walked to the wooden crate, ignoring the quick glance of concern from his assistant, a younger man named David who helped with logistics. David had repeatedly warned him that the snake could kill him and that he should never handle it bare-handed, but Jabari waved him off. The crate's lid came off with a creak of nails against wood. Inside, coiled in the dim interior, the black mamba lay mostly still. Jabari had kept it for 3 weeks, feeding it live rats and convincing himself that this constituted some form of relationship. He reached in with his bare hands, grasping the snake behind its head, despite the fact that this is considered extremely dangerous even for trained herpetologists. The mamba was nearly 9 feet long, its body thick and muscular. The tourists gasped excitedly. Jabari, probably feeding off their reaction, made a show of it, explaining in his accented English that this was one of Africa's deadliest creatures, that most people never got this close, that it required absolute respect and understanding. He draped the snake across his shoulders like a living scarf, though its head remained tense, raising and lowering slightly, a clear warning of defensive agitation. The mamba's tongue flicked rapidly, tasting the air, sensing the heat and movement around it. David, standing several feet away, noticed it first, the subtle flattening of the snake's neck, the increased tension in its body. He called out a warning, but Jabari waved him off, too focused on his audience. The tourists were snapping photos frantically, delighted by the spectacle. One of them asked if they could touch it. Jabari was turning to answer, his head angled to the left, when the mamba struck. The attack was faster than human reaction time. The snake delivered a single, precise defensive bite, its head snapping forward in a fraction of a second, with follow-up strikes snapping through the air but failing to connect. Its fangs punctured the skin of his right cheek just below the cheekbone. A large dose of venom was injected directly into the highly vascular tissue of his face, mere inches from major blood vessels. Jabari screamed, a single sharp cry of shock and pain, and grabbed at the snake, pulling it away from his body. The mamba disengaged and retreated, disappearing under the scrap metal and brush at the edge of the compound. The tourists stood frozen. Jabari staggered backward, hand pressed to his cheek where 2 puncture wounds were already swelling. Within 20 minutes, early neurotoxic symptoms set in, with tingling, facial weakness, and muscle twitching spreading down his face and neck. He attempted to speak, but words came slurred. David dialed emergency services immediately, providing a precise location and explaining it was a black mamba bite to the face. The ambulance arrived in approximately 18 minutes, navigating unpaved dirt roads on the outskirts of Nairobi. The paramedics found Jabari conscious but deteriorating steadily. They applied a pressure immobilization bandage and provided oxygen before transporting him to the hospital. The bite's location, close to the brain in tissue rich with blood vessels, meant the neurotoxin spread efficiently. Respiratory muscle weakness progressed over the next hour, his chest movements becoming shallow and irregular as paralysis advanced. Jabari died within 1 hour of the bite, his respiratory system failing as he lost the ability to breathe independently. Antivenom was delayed on arrival, a common limitation in smaller Kenyan hospitals, and supportive measures were insufficient to reverse the paralysis in time. The coroner's report listed the cause of death as respiratory failure secondary to neurotoxic envenomation from a black mamba bite, noting minimal local injury but profound systemic neuroparalysis. The safari company that occasionally contracted Jabari's services immediately terminated all snake demonstrations across their operations. The German tourists provided statements to police and left Kenya 2 days later. Their vacation irrevocably altered. David found other work with a legitimate tour operator. No memorial service was held for Jabari. His family, embarrassed by the circumstances of his death and the illegal keeping of dangerous animals, buried him quietly. It was June 7, 2017, in the bustling Chalai market in Thiruvananthapuram, Kerala. The morning air hung thick with moisture from the previous night's monsoon rains. By midday, something would happen in one corner of this crowded marketplace that would change how venomous snakes were sold in Kerala forever. Ravi Menon was 40 years old. A lean man with calloused hands and deep-set eyes had been selling exotic reptiles for nearly 15 years, operating from a small wooden stall squeezed between a spice merchant and a woman who sold jasmine garlands. Ravi lived alone in a cramped room above his shop, his only companions the dozen snakes he kept in wooden boxes and glass terrariums. The locals knew Ravi as a man who took dangerous risks. While other snake handlers used long metal hooks and thick leather gloves, Ravi preferred to work with his bare hands. He believed that direct contact allowed him to better read the animal's moods and movements. Customers would gather in small crowds to watch him lift cobras and vipers from their containers, mesmerized by his apparent fearlessness. Ravi had been waiting for this particular morning for 2 weeks. A wealthy collector from Kochi was coming to see his newest acquisition, a monocled cobra he had purchased from a dealer in Tamil Nadu. The snake was magnificent, nearly 4 feet long with distinctive eye spots on the back of its hood. It was also increasingly aggressive, coiling tightly whenever anyone approached its container and spreading its hood at the slightest disturbance. The marketplace that morning buzzed with its usual energy. The stone floor was slick with water and crushed vegetables, making footing treacherous in some areas. Monocled cobras are among India's most dangerous snakes. Unlike their larger king cobra cousins, they are smaller but far more aggressive when cornered. Their venom contains powerful neurotoxins that attack the nervous system, causing paralysis and respiratory failure within hours if left untreated. In the wild, they prefer to retreat when threatened, but in captivity, with nowhere to escape, they become unpredictable and defensive. Experienced handlers knew to give these snakes plenty of space and always use proper tools. But Ravi had grown overconfident through the years, without a serious accident. Just 3 days earlier, a young boy had wandered too close to the cobra's container, and the snake had struck at the glass so violently that several customers had jumped back in alarm. Ravi had laughed it off, telling the boy's worried mother that the snake was just showing off. He had dismissed the incident as normal behavior, refusing to acknowledge what other handlers would have recognized as clear warning signs. The day went on, and Ravi arranged his stall carefully, positioning the cobra's wooden box on the counter, where the collector would have the best view. Inside the container, the snake remained coiled in the back corner. Around 10:15 a.m., Ravi spotted his customer making his way through the crowd. Ravi began preparing for his demonstration. He had done this hundreds of times before. Lift the snake, show its hood, demonstrate its alertness to prove its quality. When Ravi opened the cobra's container, the snake was already pressed against the front wall with its hood spread. Its tongue moved quickly, and its body was tight. Instead of staying in the back corner like usual, it was ready to attack. The cobra bit Ravi as soon as he put his hand inside. The snake moved very fast and bit his wrist above his watch. The pain went up his arm right away. Ravi tried to pull back, but the cobra held on and wrapped around his arm. People screamed and ran away, knocking over fruit and breaking bottles on the ground. The collector just stood there, shocked. For several seconds, that felt much longer. Ravi fought with the snake around his arm. The cobra's hood was wide open, showing the marks that give these snakes their name. Every time Ravi moved, the fangs went deeper and more poison went into his body. Finally, Ravi hit his arm hard against the wooden table. This made the cobra let go and fall back into its box. The snake curled up right away. Ravi stepped back, holding his bleeding arm. You could see 4 holes where the fangs had bitten him. The market became very busy and loud. The spice seller next door tore a piece from a cloth bag and tied it around Ravi's arm. Someone ran toward the main road to get help, yelling for drivers to move out of the way. The collector was scared, but stayed calm now. He got down next to Ravi and pressed hard on the cloth as blood came through it. Ravi stayed sitting up, but his body was shaking. The feeling of no sensation moved past his hand, and his words were hard to understand when he tried to talk. The morning traffic was very heavy, so it was a small 3-wheel taxi and not an ambulance that took Ravi away. The driver used his horn the whole time as people and motorcycles moved out of the way. At one point, Ravi's head fell to the side and the collector shook him hard to keep him awake. Doctors met them at the hospital door and took him quickly into the emergency room. They gave him medicine to fight the snake poison right away, but by then, Ravi's arm had grown very big with swelling. His skin had turned dark with marks that went past his elbow. The treatment saved his life, but left his hand weak forever. 3 of his fingers never got full feeling back, and his grip strength never came back. The bite changed more than Ravi's body. It changed the market. Local government workers said that all dangerous snakes must be kept behind locked walls, and they started checking the stalls without warning. Ravi's cobra was taken away and sent to a government snake research center. Months later, Ravi closed his stall for good. The small space was taken over by a vegetable seller, but people who shop there still pointed out to new people. That's where the snake man was bitten, they say. It is a quiet warning that even the most skilled handler can run out of luck. It was April 7th, 2016, and the small private lab operated out of a converted warehouse on the outskirts of Tucson. The equipment was minimal and suited only for small-scale venom handling, lacking the layered safety systems found in regulated facilities. The workbenches held a sparse but functional set of tools for basic venom processing and storage, reflecting the limitations of a privately run operation. The desert landscape outside provided the perfect isolation for Dr. Nathan Blackwood's controversial venom research. Dr. Nathan Blackwood had a steady research background in venom studies, but colleagues' notes and internal emails repeatedly documented his habit of ignoring routine safety steps. At 43, he was experienced but known for cutting corners, often dismissing standard procedures as unnecessary or too slow. Nathan's privately funded laboratory allowed him to work without the oversight and safety requirements that governed university research facilities. He often worked alone during evening hours, preferring the solitude that allowed him to focus on his experiments without interruption. His recent attempts to isolate specific venom proteins had made him even more confident in his abilities and more dismissive of safety measures. Nathan prepared to extract venom from a large western diamondback rattlesnake delivered earlier that week, a specimen measuring a little over 4 feet, and his intake notes recorded repeated coiling, loud rattling, and striking at the transfer hook during housing. His lab journals showed he had been working through the afternoon, consuming several cups of coffee and rushing to test a new extraction method. Recent entries documented multiple instances of him skipping standard restraint tools, noting he believed they slowed his workflow. The journals also showed an increasing pattern of working alone and bypassing safety steps, a trend colleagues had previously warned him about before he left institutional research. Western diamondback rattlesnakes are among North America's most dangerous venomous serpents, with adult specimens capable of delivering massive doses of potent hemotoxic venom. These aggressive pit vipers can strike with lightning speed across distances up to 2/3 of their body length, and their heat-sensing organs allow them to target warm-blooded prey with deadly accuracy. Their venom can cause severe tissue destruction, internal bleeding, and progressive circulatory failure without timely medical treatment. Even experienced handlers treat these snakes with extreme caution, using specialized equipment and safety protocols developed through decades of research. Nathan had decided to test his theory about venom extraction efficiency by milking the rattlesnake directly without using the standard restraint equipment that other researchers considered essential. He believed his superior reflexes and understanding of snake behavior would allow him to handle the specimen safely using only his bare hands, a practice he had noted in his journals as an attempt to streamline procedures. The large western diamondback had been stressed by its recent capture and transport, making it even more defensive and unpredictable than usual. Nathan approached the snake's enclosure with characteristic overconfidence, moving closer despite the snake displaying the same defensive behaviors noted during intake. When Nathan reached into the enclosure to grasp the rattlesnake behind its head, the animal's response was instantaneous. The snake's powerful muscles coiled, and it struck with explosive force, its fangs hitting Nathan's dominant hand before he could react. It delivered a fast strike and release, injecting a substantial amount of venom in a single, clean contact. Phone logs and the incomplete emergency call indicated he recognized the seriousness of the bite based on how abruptly the call ended, but investigators noted that no antivenom was stored on site, likely due to cost and storage requirements, rather than any regulated mandate. The isolated location of his laboratory meant emergency medical services would require time to reach him, time his worsening condition would not allow. Nathan's attempts to call for help became increasingly ineffective as his motor function deteriorated under the effects of the envenomation. The hemotoxic venom caused rapid swelling at the bite site and early signs of circulatory stress, consistent with a severe envenomation. Without antivenom or immediate medical care, his condition worsened steadily before responders could reach the site. His own research notes, scattered across his laboratory bench, documented his dismissive attitude toward the safety protocols that might have saved his life. Investigators used the timestamp on his last recorded instrument activity and the abrupt end of the emergency call to estimate when he likely collapsed. A contracted building maintenance worker discovered Nathan's body the next morning during a routine check of the property. The investigation revealed his reckless approach to handling dangerous specimens and his failure to maintain basic safety equipment. The rattlesnake had escaped through the partially unlatched enclosure door, but was secured by responders during the initial scene assessment. Local authorities documented several safety deficiencies within the lab during the investigation, noting them in the final incident report. It was May 17, 2018, and the rural construction site in Georgia buzzed with activity as heavy equipment cleared forested land for a new subdivision development. Tommy Rodriguez operated his bulldozer with practiced skill, pushing aside trees and brush to make way for the planned homes. The 26-year-old heavy equipment operator had been working construction for 8 years, but he had no training in wildlife encounters despite working in areas where dangerous animals were common. Tommy was known among his co-workers for his fearless attitude and willingness to handle situations that other workers avoided. He was supporting his pregnant wife and was eager to impress his supervisors to secure a promotion that would provide better benefits for his growing family. The construction site was clearing habitat that had been home to various wildlife species, displacing animals and forcing them into contact with human activity. The forested area being developed had been undisturbed for decades, providing ideal ideal habitat for various snake species, including some of the most venomous in North America. The construction activity was destroying dens and hiding places, forcing snakes into the open, where encounters with workers became inevitable. Company safety protocols required workers to report wildlife sightings to supervisors, but these rules were often ignored in the rush to complete projects on schedule. Eastern coral snakes are among the most venomous species in North America, possessing a potent neurotoxic venom that attacks the nervous system and causes respiratory paralysis. They are secretive snakes that spend most of their time underground or hidden beneath logs and debris, making encounters with humans relatively rare. Coral snakes are often confused with harmless species, leading to dangerous misidentifications. Their venom contains powerful neurotoxins that cause progressive muscle paralysis, making immediate medical treatment essential for survival. Tommy was clearing brush with his bulldozer when the machine's blade uncovered what appeared to be multiple snakes sheltering independently under debris beneath a fallen log. Several snakes scattered as their hiding place was destroyed, but one coral snake appeared to be severely injured from the encounter with the heavy machinery. Tommy shut down his bulldozer to investigate, curious about the colorful snake he had uncovered. The coral snake lay motionless among the debris, its distinctive red, yellow, and black banding clearly visible in the afternoon sunlight. Tommy assumed the snake was dead, killed by his bulldozer during the clearing operation. He decided to pick up the snake to show his co-workers, thinking it would make an interesting conversation piece during their lunch break. Tommy reached down and grasped the coral snake with his bare hands, not realizing that the snake was only stunned and disoriented from its encounter with the bulldozer. The moment Tommy's hand made contact, the coral snake bit him on the palm, chewing for several seconds before its small fangs penetrated the skin and injected a dose of potent neurotoxic venom. Tommy dropped the snake and examined the small puncture wounds on his palm, initially dismissing the bite as minor due to the snake's small size. His co-workers gathered around as Tommy explained what had happened, but none of them recognized the serious nature of a coral snake envenomation. The rural construction site was 35 minutes from the nearest hospital, and the delay in seeking medical treatment would prove fatal. Tommy's co-workers called 911, but the remote location of the construction site delayed the arrival of emergency medical personnel. Initially, Tommy experienced only mild symptoms and continued working, believing the bite was harmless due to the snake's small size. Several hours after the bite, the coral snake venom began its deadly progression through Tommy's system. The neurotoxic poison attacked his respiratory muscles, making breathing increasingly difficult. Tommy's speech became slurred as the neurotoxins affected his neuromuscular function, and his vision became blurred. By the time paramedics arrived, Tommy was experiencing severe respiratory distress. Tommy was transported to the rural hospital, but the facility had delayed recognition of the situation, delaying his need for intubation. Without access to mechanical ventilation to assist his breathing, Tommy's condition rapidly deteriorated as the coral snake venom caused progressive respiratory muscle paralysis. Tommy died from prolonged hypoxia due to untreated respiratory paralysis, as the coral snake venom caused complete paralysis of his breathing muscles. The neurotoxic poison had specifically targeted his respiratory system, making it impossible for his body to maintain adequate breathing. The small size of the coral snake had deceived Tommy into thinking the bite was harmless, but the potent venom had proved fatal despite the snake's diminutive appearance. The investigation revealed that Tommy had violated company safety protocols by handling wildlife without proper training or equipment. His death devastated his pregnant wife and led to mandatory wildlife safety training for all construction crews working in areas where venomous snakes were present. The incident highlighted the hidden dangers faced by workers in industries that disturb natural habitats. Tommy's tragic encounter with an eastern coral snake became a cautionary tale about the importance of proper wildlife training for construction workers. His death left behind a widow and unborn child, serving as a stark reminder that even small snakes can be deadly when not treated with proper respect. It was April 7th, 2015, and the afternoon heat in suburban Toowoomba, Queensland, hung thick and still as Evan Alquist unlocked the garden shed behind his parents' weatherboard home. Unaware that his 2-year experiment in backyard snake breeding was about to end with a fatal eastern brown snake envenomation. Evan Elquist was an 18-year-old unemployed high school graduate who had spent the last 2 years transforming his parents' garden shed into an unlicensed reptile breeding operation. He had started at 16 after binge-watching snake handling videos online, convinced that the professional breeders he admired had no special training he couldn't replicate on his own. His parents, busy with their own lives and largely absent during the day, had dismissed his hobby as a phase. Evan's reputation among his small circle of friends was that of someone who took unnecessary risks for attention. He regularly posted videos of himself free-handling venomous snakes, his bare hands gripping scaled bodies just behind their heads, about to end with a fatal eastern brown snake envenomation, the result of 2 years of unchecked confidence built on online misinformation. His goal that autumn was simple: expand his collection and eventually sell offspring to other enthusiasts through online forums. He had acquired several species without permits, keeping them in cheap plastic storage tubs, stacked haphazardly on metal shelving. Among his collection was a large adult eastern brown, likely over 5 feet, that he had purchased from a questionable source 3 months earlier. Friends who visited the shed had warned him repeatedly that he was pushing his luck, especially with the brown snake, which had grown increasingly aggressive during feeding times. Evan dismissed their concerns with the same confidence that had carried him through dozens of handling sessions without incident. The eastern brown snake is the second most venomous land snake in the world, capable of delivering a venom dose sufficient to cause fatal systemic envenomation in multiple adult humans. These snakes can grow up to 7 feet long and are notoriously fast and aggressive when threatened, capable of striking multiple times in rapid succession. Their venom contains potent procoagulant toxins and cardiotoxic components that cause rapid clotting factor consumption, internal bleeding, hypotension, and cardiovascular collapse, rather than prominent localized tissue destruction. Unlike some venomous species that deliver dry bites as warnings, eastern brown snakes typically inject significant amounts of venom with each strike. They are responsible for more deaths in Australia than any other snake species, and experts universally recommend never handling them without proper equipment, training, and immediate access to antivenom. That Tuesday afternoon, Evan had decided to transfer the brown snake to a larger enclosure. He worked alone, as he usually did, with his phone propped on a shelf to record the process for his social media followers. The shed's single window provided minimal ventilation, and the temperature inside had climbed past 90 degrees. Evan removed the lid from the plastic tub, and the snake immediately raised the front third of its body in a defensive S-curve. A clear warning signal he either didn't recognize or chose to ignore. He reached in bare-handed, attempting to grasp the snake behind its head, but his palm slipped on the smooth scales. The snake recoiled and struck at his hand, missing by inches. Evan jerked backward, knocking over an empty tub, and the noise agitated the snake further. It coiled tightly, its head tracking his movements with predatory focus. Evan muttered something inaudible on the recovered video footage and reached in again, this time trying to pin the snake's head with one hand while scooping its body with the other. The technique was clumsy and poorly executed. The next strike came without warning, the snake's head snapping forward with mechanical precision. Both fangs punctured Evan's right forearm, sinking deep into the muscle. He screamed and instinctively shook his arm violently, a reaction that increased venom dispersion through muscle movement and circulation. As he tried to pull away, the snake struck again, this time hitting his wrist. The fangs held for a fraction of a second before Evan finally wrenched his arm free, stumbling backward into the shelving unit. The pain was immediate and intense, radiating up his arm like fire spreading through dry brush. Evan clutched his forearm, blood seeping from 2 distinct puncture wounds, with limited local swelling and early bruising. He staggered towards the shed door, his phone forgotten, and still recording the empty space where he had stood. The snake, now free, slithered across the concrete floor toward a gap in the wallboards. Evan made it approximately 15 feet into the backyard before the venom's systemic effects took hold. His legs buckled, and he dropped to his knees in the patchy grass, vomiting violently. The venom's procoagulant effects rapidly consumed clotting factors, leading to internal bleeding and falling blood pressure, while hypoxia set in as circulation collapsed, rather than purely localized injury. He tried to call out, but managed only a strangled gasp. Bleeding from the bite sites, minor gum oozing and pallor were visible signs of systemic failure. He developed sudden collapse marked by profound weakness, confusion, and involuntary muscle twitching, as severe coagulopathy and hypotension disrupted cerebral perfusion. His breathing became increasingly labored as shock and cardiovascular collapse impaired oxygen delivery. He collapsed face down in the grass, still conscious but barely able to move. The entire sequence from bite to cardiovascular collapse had taken approximately 12 minutes, consistent with documented Eastern brown envenomation cases. Evan's mother arrived home at 3:47 p.m. and found him lying motionless in the yard, with moderate arm swelling and clear signs of shock and collapse, his face pale. She called emergency services immediately, her screams audible to neighbors who later gave statements to police. Paramedics arrived 14 minutes after her call, and Evan showed severe signs of envenomation and shock. They initiated aggressive supportive care, airway management, oxygen, intravenous fluids, airway support, and advanced life support measures, but did not administer antivenom in the field. Antivenom was prepared and administered upon arrival at Toowoomba Hospital, but he was pronounced dead shortly afterward at 4:23 p.m. The attending physician noted that even when antivenom was administered promptly on arrival, the extent of systemic envenomation and delay from the initial bites made reversal unlikely. Police seized the remaining snakes from the shed, including 6 venomous species kept without permits. The escaped brown snake was never recovered, prompting a brief neighborhood alert. Local news ran a cautionary story about the dangers of unlicensed reptile keeping, but it generated little attention beyond Toowoomba. No criminal charges were filed, as Evan had been an adult at 18, and the only victim of his own negligence. His parents, devastated and unable to remain in the house where their son had died, quietly sold the property 4 months later and moved interstate. The shed was demolished by the new owners. It was August 12, 2015, in a quiet neighborhood in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. The late afternoon sun was setting, casting long shadows across the well-kept lawns. From the street, nothing seemed unusual, and the houses looked calm. But inside one of the homes at the end of the street, an accident was quietly taking shape. Roger Halston was 45 years old and lived alone in his 2-story house. He had been obsessed with snakes since his 20s, and over the years had built a collection of more than 50 snakes. His collection included large Burmese pythons, king cobras, and several species of vipers. He had changed his home to fit them, filling the basement with glass tanks, heat lamps, and other equipment. The air was thick with the musky smell of snake waste, which he considered a minor problem. Roger spent his time reading about snakes, keeping feeding logs and watching behavior, rarely leaving the basement for anything else. A week earlier, Roger had bought a rare white king cobra from a private seller. Known for being unpredictable, the snake was considered both a challenge and a prized addition among collectors. Earlier that week, A python had bitten him while he was fixing its tank, but he dismissed it as minor. That evening, he planned to feed several snakes at once, confident he could manage the risks. Friends and fellow hobbyists had warned him repeatedly against handling multiple venomous snakes at the same time, warning that even a small mistake could be fatal. But he ignored them. The basement was dimly lit, with heat lamps buzzing above each tank. Feeding containers and empty boxes were scattered across the floor, along with snake-handling tools and partially prepared frozen rodents. The aisles between tanks were narrow, leaving little room to move. The snakes themselves ranged from 10-foot Burmese pythons to adult king cobras, each capable of deadly defensive behavior if startled. Pythons squeeze with enormous strength, and venomous snakes like king cobras and vipers can strike quickly, affecting the nervous system or delivering tissue-damaging venom. Neighbors had noticed unusual activity in Roger's home. Some had seen large boxes of snakes arriving and were sometimes overwhelmed by the smell coming from his basement. A few had casually warned him about stacking tanks too high and overfilling his space. Local rules required secure handling and containment for venomous snakes. But Roger, overconfident in his experience, ignored the warning signs. He overlooked hissed warnings, defensive coiling, and repeated strikes at his gloved hands during routine feeding. At about 7:45 p.m., Roger began the feeding process. He carried several dead rodents into the basement, moving from tank to tank. The vipers were the first to react defensively. One viper jerked backward sharply when Roger's hand approached, narrowly missing a bite. Distracted, he stepped awkwardly, his foot catching the edge of a nearby python tank. The small python tipped over, falling with a crash that echoed across the cramped basement. The noise startled several snakes in the immediate area. One python lunged defensively at Roger's legs, followed moments later by another reacting to nearby movement. The white king cobra, sensing sudden disturbance, struck defensively at exposed arms and legs. Each snake acted independently, responding to vibrations, sudden motions, and unfamiliar sounds in its immediate environment. Other snakes coiled defensively or retreated to corners of the basement, avoiding direct involvement. A neighbor, Sarah Peterson, later reported hearing loud hisses, thuds, and breaking glass faintly audible through a partially open basement window. Alarmed, she called 911. Roger's struggle lasted only a few minutes. By the time help arrived, he was found unresponsive, partially coiled by one large python. Bite marks were evident from the king cobra, which had begun causing severe neurotoxic effects, and from several vipers. The floor was scattered with broken glass, bedding, and overturned feeding containers. 3 of the snakes were captured in temporary boxes, while the remainder hid in basement corners or dense vegetation near the house, out of sight. Security cameras from neighbors captured some movement and disturbances, confirming that the sequence of events, including slipping, tipping a tank, and startling the snakes, directly led to the fatal incident, though the strikes themselves were not visible. Investigators concluded that the bites and constriction were defensive responses, not a coordinated attack. Paramedics attempted to stabilize him while animal control worked to secure the remaining snakes. Despite their efforts to administer antivenom and provide emergency care, the combined effects of multiple venomous bites and progressive python constriction had already caused severe damage. The king cobra's venom affected his nervous system. The viper bites caused tissue damage, and the python's gradual constriction further complicated his breathing and blood circulation. In the weeks following the incident, the city reviewed private ownership regulations for venomous reptiles, imposing stricter containment and liability rules. Prospective snake owners were now required to obtain special permits, maintain secure enclosures, and carry liability insurance. The incident also prompted discussions about the ethics and safety of keeping large collections of venomous snakes in residential areas. Wildlife experts emphasized that these animals, while fascinating, require specialized knowledge, proper facilities, and respect for their dangerous nature. It was April 12, 2017, and the rolling limestone hills of the Texas Hill Country stretched under the warm spring sun, their oak woodlands and rocky canyons glowing with fresh color after recent rains. The region's scattered creeks and shaded ravines supported a wide range of wildlife adapted to Central Texas's shifting seasons. Spring storms had triggered a vibrant burst of wildflower blooms, turning normally muted terrain into a photographer's paradise. Rebecca Torres had driven from Austin specifically to capture images of the spring wildflowers that bloomed so rarely in this harsh environment. At 31, the graphic designer had built a reputation for stunning nature photography that provided both artistic fulfillment and escape from her demanding corporate job. Her weekend hiking trips had become essential stress relief, allowing her to disconnect from technology and reconnect with the natural world. Rebecca possessed basic knowledge of desert wildlife from her years of hiking in Texas, but her experience was limited to more common species found in accessible areas. She had never encountered a venomous snake in the wild and had developed a false sense of security based on her previous hiking experiences in less dangerous environments. That morning, Rebecca had hiked several miles along one of the hill country's lesser-used trails, following reports of exceptional wildflower displays in areas rarely visited by casual tourists. The recent rains had created ideal conditions for both wildflower growth and increased reptile activity, as snakes and small mammals moved closer to the surface to take advantage of the moisture. Western coral snakes are among the most venomous serpents in North America, possessing potent neurotoxic venom that attacks the nervous system and causes progressive paralysis. These small, colorful snakes are often confused with harmless species due to their distinctive red, yellow, and black banding pattern. Despite their typically reclusive nature, coral snakes can deliver dangerous bites when handled or accidentally contacted, and their venom typically causes respiratory failure within 8 to 24 hours of envenomation. Their small fangs and secretive behavior often result in bites going unnoticed until serious symptoms develop. While photographing a cluster of bright yellow wildflowers, likely Engelmann daisies, Rebecca noticed a brightly colored snake partially exposed among the flowers, likely displaced from cover by recent rains and increased surface activity. The serpent's bright red, yellow, and black bands created a striking contrast against the golden blooms, and Rebecca immediately recognized the potential for an award-winning photograph. Rebecca approached the snake slowly, and investigators later concluded she had likely misidentified it as a harmless species based on her close camera positioning in the photos. She used a small stick to nudge the surrounding vegetation, unintentionally disturbing the snake as she tried to improve the lighting for her shot. The serpent remained coiled in place, a posture herpetology consultants later described as consistent with a disturbed but non-aggressive coral snake. As Rebecca adjusted her camera position, investigators later concluded, based on faint puncture or scrape marks on her finger and the final images on her camera, that she had come into accidental contact with the coral snake's head. Bite marks from coral snakes can be subtle or easily missed, so the photographs were critical to establishing proximity. The wound characteristics suggested the snake made brief contact and may have worked its small, fixed fangs in a short chewing motion before retreating, a known envenomation behavior for elapid coral snakes when disturbed at close range. Camera timestamps showed she continued photographing the area for several minutes afterward, unaware she had sustained a bite. Because coral snake marks can be minimal, investigators relied on the images, timestamps, and later symptoms to link the exposure to her decline. She then spent several more hours photographing other wildflower sites along the trail, still unaware that the venom had entered her system. The coral snake's venom worked gradually, initially causing no noticeable symptoms as she hiked to other wildflower locations throughout the morning. By late afternoon, early symptoms, Fatigue and weakness appeared, which she assumed were due to dehydration and heat exposure from the long hike. As evening approached, the neurotoxic effects became more pronounced, causing difficulty with coordination and speech that made hiking back to her vehicle increasingly challenging. The coral snake venom caused progressive paralysis that eventually affected Rebecca's respiratory system during the night, making it impossible for her to call for emergency assistance. Her cell phone showed no signal in the remote area, and her weakening condition had prevented her from reaching her vehicle before collapsing. Local search and rescue teams discovered Rebecca's body 2 days later when she failed to check out of her reserved campsite. Her camera contained the final photographs she had taken, showing her close proximity to the coral snake and documenting the moments leading up to her fatal encounter. The images provided valuable evidence for the investigation and served as a reminder of the hidden dangers present in seemingly peaceful natural settings. The investigation confirmed her cause of death as respiratory failure resulting from an untreated coral snake envenomation. Rangers recovered her camera beside her body, and the final sequence of images helped establish how close she had been to the snake before the bite. The case was later incorporated into seasonal safety briefings, emphasizing proper wildlife identification and the risks of approaching animals for photography. It was June 2nd, 2014. And the stifling heat of rural Punjab pressed down on the small village of Malwa Kalan like a weight. The air thick with dust and the smell of ripening wheat, as Harjit Malwa stood in his darkened storage room holding a burlap sack that writhed with the movements of the cobra inside, a solution to his rat problem that would kill him before midnight. Harjit Malwa was a 52-year-old farmer who worked a modest plot of land that had been in his family for 3 generations. He was known throughout the village as stubborn, the kind of man who dismissed modern methods in favor of what he called traditional wisdom, though his neighbors often pointed out that his traditions were frequently just his own ideas dressed up as ancestral knowledge. His wheat and rice crops were adequate but not exceptional, and he supplemented his income by storing grain for other farmers in a converted room of his house. The rats had become a serious problem over the past month, chewing through sacks and contaminating stores with their droppings. He had lost nearly a quarter of his inventory, and the farmers who had paid him for storage were beginning to complain. His neighbor, Gurmeet, had suggested commercial rat poison or snap traps, even offering to lend him several. Harjit had waved him off dismissively, saying chemicals were expensive and traps required constant monitoring. He had announced his plan 3 days earlier. He would catch a cobra from the fields and release it in his house to hunt the rats naturally. Gurmeet and several other villagers had told him this was insane, that cobras were unpredictable and dangerous, and that bringing one into a home where his wife and 3 children slept was illegal and reckless beyond measure. Harjit had laughed at their concerns, insisting that snakes were nature's solution to rodents, that his grandfather had done the same thing, though no one could verify this claim. His wife had protested, but she said that Harjit had dismissed her worries as feminine overcaution. The fields surrounding the village were a patchwork of irrigation channels and crop rows, the earth cracked and dry between waterings, with dense vegetation along the drainage ditches where snakes sheltered from the heat. Indian cobras are among the most dangerous snakes in South Asia, responsible for thousands of deaths annually. They typically grow between 4 and 6 feet in length, with fangs capable of delivering a potentially fatal dose of venom, especially when more than one effective bite occurs. The venom is primarily neurotoxic, attacking the nervous system and causing progressive paralysis that eventually stops the diaphragm from functioning, leading to respiratory failure. Cobras are generally shy and will flee from humans when possible, but when cornered or threatened, they become highly defensive, raising their distinctive hoods and striking with remarkable speed and accuracy. Cobras brought indoors are highly unpredictable and unlikely to hunt rodents effectively. Stress and confinement usually make defensive strikes far more likely than purposeful hunting. Harjit had found the cobra 2 days earlier, coiled near an irrigation channel. Using a forked stick and a burlap sack, he had managed to capture it, a process that had taken nearly an hour, according to neighbors. He kept the snake in the sack, tied shut, and placed in a clay pot in his shed, feeding it nothing, believing hunger would make it hunt better, though in reality this only made it more defensive. His eldest son, Navdeep, who was 19 and home from technical college, had seen the pot and asked his father what he was doing. When Harjit explained, Navdeep had stared at him in disbelief, asking if he understood how dangerous this was. Harjit had told him to mind his studies and let men handle practical matters. On the evening of June 2nd, after his wife and younger children had gone to visit her sister in the next village, Harjit decided it was time. Navdeep was in the front room studying when he heard his father moving around in the storage area. Harjit carried the clay pot into the house, the sack inside still moving. He had no protective gloves, snake hooks, or other safety equipment, planning to guide the snake toward the storage room where the rats were most active. He untied the sack in the narrow hallway between the main room and the storage area, then tipped it over and stepped back. The cobra emerged slowly, its body uncoiling as it tasted the air with its tongue, disoriented by the sudden change in environment. Based on brief statements from Harjit, this is how the accident unfolded. He made his first mistake by trying to direct the snake immediately. He jabbed at it with the broom, trying to push it toward the storage room door. The cobra, already stressed from days in captivity, reacted defensively. It raised the front third of its body off the ground, spreading its hood wide, a clear warning display that Harjit either didn't recognize or chose to ignore. He jabbed again, and the snake began moving, but not toward the storage room. It moved toward the corner where shadows offered perceived safety. Harjit stepped forward to cut it off. The broom extended, and the cobra struck. The first bite hit Harjit's right thigh, the fangs punching through the thin cotton of his garment and sinking deep into the muscle. The strike was so fast that Harjit didn't register it until the snake had already pulled back. He shouted in pain and surprise, stumbling backward, and the cobra struck again immediately, hitting the same leg slightly higher, closer to the groin. These were 2 full, effective bites, delivering 2 full venom-injecting bites, with the second strike occurring dangerously close to major blood vessels in the upper thigh, accelerating systemic spread. The fangs left 4 distinct puncture wounds, each bleeding slightly, with visible puncture wounds and progressive swelling, while systemic neurotoxic effects advanced rapidly. Navdeep heard his father's shout and ran from the front room. He found Harjit staggering in the hallway, the cobra already fleeing toward the rafters, its body disappearing into the shadows above. Harjit was clutching his thigh, his face contorted, trying to explain what had happened. Navdeep could see the bite marks. He ran to the neighbor's house, pounding on Gurmeet's door, shouting for help. Within minutes, several neighbors had gathered. They found Harjit sitting on the floor, his back against the wall, his leg marked by intense swelling and bleeding. The venom was working rapidly. Harjit had vomited twice. His breathing had become labored, each breath requiring visible effort. Sweat poured down his face despite the evening coolness. The pain in his leg was intense, and he was moaning continuously, a low sound that frightened the neighbors more than screaming would have. They loaded him into the back of Gurmeet's pickup truck, Navdeep climbing in beside his father. The nearest clinic with antivenom was in the town of Moga, nearly 15 miles away on poorly maintained roads, resulting in a prolonged transport time. No airway support or assisted ventilation was available during transport. As they drove, Harjit's condition deteriorated rapidly. The paralysis began in his extremities, a tingling numbness spreading upward. His eyelids began to droop, the muscles controlling them affected by the neurotoxin. His breathing became increasingly shallow as the venom attacked the nerves controlling his diaphragm. Navdeep held his father's hand, watching helplessly as consciousness faded from his eyes. They arrived at the clinic approximately 40 minutes after the bite. Medical staff rushed out to meet them, but Harjit was already unresponsive, his breathing barely perceptible. They carried him inside and attempted resuscitation, administering antivenom and providing respiratory support. But the absence of early ventilation combined with the double thigh envenomation and long transport had allowed respiratory paralysis to progress beyond reversal. His diaphragm had stopped functioning, and despite manual ventilation efforts, his heart stopped within minutes. He was declared dead at 9:47 p.m. Clinical assessment determined the cause of death to be respiratory failure due to neurotoxic envenomation from an Indian cobra bite. The house was fumigated the following day by a professional snake handler from Moga, who found the cobra coiled in the rafters above the storage room and removed it. Harjit's family held a funeral attended by most of the village. Navdeep left college to help support the family, taking work in Moga and sending money home. It was April 22, 2015, when the suburban outskirts of Tampa, Florida, became the scene of a deadly encounter that would highlight the growing conflict between urban development and wildlife habitats. The Vance family property, located in a quiet residential neighborhood that bordered undeveloped wetlands, featured a modest ranch-style home surrounded by mature oak trees and native Florida vegetation. Nina Vance, a 41-year-old real estate administrator, had lived on the property for over 8 years with her husband Mark and their teenage son Tyler. Known for her practical nature and self-reliant approach to household management, Nina took pride in maintaining their property without relying on outside help. She handled everything from landscaping to minor repairs, viewing these tasks as both therapeutic and economically sensible. Nina had been managing undiagnosed hypertension for months, attributing her occasional dizziness and fatigue to work stress. Her reluctance to seek medical attention would prove to be a critical factor in the events that followed. Recent months had brought significant changes to the area surrounding the Vance property. A major residential development project had begun construction just half a mile away, involving the clearing of over 200 acres of natural habitat. The construction activities had displaced numerous wildlife species, forcing them to seek new territories and shelter. Local residents had reported increased sightings of raccoons, opossums, and various reptiles in their yards. Nina had noticed these changes herself, observing more frequent animal tracks around her property and discovering evidence of creatures taking shelter in various outbuildings. Despite these signs, she maintained her routine of outdoor maintenance work, confident in her ability to handle any situations that might arise. On this particular evening, she had planned to retrieve her gardening tools from the backyard storage shed. The eastern diamondback rattlesnake represents the largest and most dangerous venomous serpent in North America, capable of reaching lengths of up to 8 feet and weighing over 10 pounds. These formidable predators are native to the southeastern United States, with Florida hosting one of the largest populations. What makes the eastern diamondback particularly dangerous is its potent hemotoxic venom, which attacks blood cells, blood vessels, and tissue at the cellular level. A single bite can deliver a large volume of hemotoxic venom, with severe envenomation capable of causing life-threatening tissue destruction and systemic failure. These serpents seek shelter in dark, enclosed spaces, making storage sheds attractive hiding spots. As the sun began to set on April 22nd, Nina made her way across the backyard toward the wooden storage shed that housed her gardening equipment. Nina approached the shed with her usual confidence, keys in hand, and focused on the task ahead. The interior of the shed was dimly lit, with only the fading daylight from the doorway providing illumination. She opened the door and stepped inside, immediately blocking much of the available light with her body. Without pausing to allow her eyes to adjust or to check for any signs of animal presence, Nina moved directly toward the back corner where her gardening tools were stored. The eastern diamondback rattlesnake had taken refuge in the shed earlier that day, seeking cool shelter from the warm afternoon temperatures. The serpent had coiled itself behind a stack of clay flower pots in the exact corner where Nina stored her equipment. The snake, measuring approximately 6 feet in length, had been resting peacefully until the sudden intrusion disrupted its sanctuary. As Nina bent down and reached behind the stacked pots to retrieve her tools, her hand came within inches of the concealed rattlesnake. The serpent, startled by the sudden movement and unable to retreat further into the confined space, perceived the approaching hand as an immediate threat. The snake struck defensively before producing an audible warning rattle. The massive eastern diamondback delivered an unusually large venom yield directly into the vascular-rich tissue between Nina's thumb and index finger, a defensive bite that injected a large venom load. The strike occurred so quickly that Nina barely registered what had happened before the snake's venom delivery system activated. The serpent then immediately withdrew deeper into the shed's recesses. The bite wounds began bleeding profusely as the venom's anticoagulant properties prevented normal blood clotting. Nina instinctively pulled her hand back and exited the shed, examining the 2 distinct puncture wounds. Within minutes, intense burning pain radiated up her arm as the venom began its destructive work on the surrounding tissue. The hemotoxic compounds immediately started breaking down blood cells and attacking blood vessel walls, causing rapid swelling and discoloration around the bite site. Initially planning to drive to the nearby urgent care facility, Nina quickly realized the severity of her condition as intense pain and swelling progressed rapidly. She redirected toward Tampa General's emergency department, knowing they would have the specialized treatment she needed. As Nina drove toward the hospital, the venom continued its relentless assault on her body's systems. The hemotoxic compounds caused widespread vascular injury and coagulation failure. Her hand and forearm swelled dramatically, while intense pain spread up her arm. During the first 20 minutes of her drive, Nina experienced escalating symptoms. Nausea overwhelmed her as the venom began affecting her cardiovascular system. Her pre-existing hypertension, combined with the massive venom load, created cardiovascular instability. Approximately 60 minutes after the bite, Nina's blood pressure dropped precipitously as damaged blood vessels lost their ability to maintain proper circulation. After 35 minutes of driving, Nina lost consciousness behind the wheel, her vehicle veering off the road and coming to rest in a roadside ditch. Passing motorists discovered her unconscious form and immediately contacted emergency services. Emergency responders transported Nina to Tampa General's emergency department, where trauma specialists immediately began aggressive treatment. Despite immediate anti-venom administration and advanced medical intervention, the prolonged delay and massive venom load had already triggered severe complications. Nina developed acute coagulopathy, with her blood losing its ability to clot properly. Internal bleeding began in multiple organ systems, while compartment syndrome developed in her bitten arm. The medical team fought for 6 hours to stabilize Nina's condition, administering multiple vials of antivenom, blood products, and vasopressor medications. However, the combination of her pre-existing hypertension, the unusually large venom yield, and the 35-minute delay in treatment had caused irreversible damage. Nina Vance succumbed to her injuries at 2:47 a.m. on April 23, 2015, approximately 8 hours after the initial snakebite. The cause of death was listed as cardiovascular collapse secondary to severe envenomation, complicated by coagulopathy and multi-organ failure. The incident prompted an immediate investigation by local wildlife authorities. Officials discovered that the recent construction activities had displaced numerous reptile species into residential areas. It was September 14, 2015, and the vast wetlands of Florida's Everglades National Park stretched endlessly under the early morning sun. The ancient ecosystem, with its maze of sawgrass prairies and cypress swamps, harbored some of North America's most dangerous reptiles. Dr. Richard Blackwood navigated through the dense vegetation, his boots squelching in the muddy terrain as he tracked the movement patterns of one of the region's most dangerous venomous animals. At 47, Dr. Blackwood had been studying venomous snakes for over 2 decades, building a reputation as one of the country's leading herpetologists. His research had taken him from the deserts of Arizona to the swamps of Louisiana, documenting snake behavior in their natural habitats. Blackwood had survived 2 previous snake bites during his career, experiences that had paradoxically made him more reckless rather than more cautious. He often dismissed safety protocols as amateur precautions, believing his experience made him immune to the dangers that threatened ordinary researchers. Blackwood had earned his doctorate before spending years building his reputation through increasingly dangerous fieldwork. His colleagues often warned him about his cavalier attitude toward safety, but Blackwood dismissed their concerns as the worries of desk-bound academics who lacked real field experience. This particular morning, Blackwood was conducting a solo research project on eastern diamondback rattlesnake den site fidelity, work that was crucial for securing his tenure at a prestigious university. He had been tracking the same population for months, documenting their seasonal movements and hunting patterns. He had consumed several drinks the night before to celebrate a colleague's retirement, leaving him dehydrated and fatigued as he began his morning fieldwork. The remote section of the Everglades where Blackwood worked was 3 miles from the nearest road, accessible only by foot through treacherous swampland. Cell phone coverage was non-existent in this wilderness, and Blackwood had deliberately chosen the isolation to avoid human interference with his subjects. Eastern diamondback rattlesnakes are the largest venomous snakes in North America, with adults reaching lengths of up to 8 feet and possessing fangs that can inject massive amounts of potent venom. They are ambush predators that rely on their excellent camouflage to remain hidden until prey comes within striking distance. Their venom contains powerful hemotoxins that destroy blood cells and tissue, causing massive internal bleeding and organ failure. Eastern diamondbacks are responsible for the most severe envenomations in North America, with their bites requiring immediate medical intervention to prevent death. Blackwood had been following fresh snake tracks through a dense patch of palmetto scrub when he spotted his target, a magnificent 6-foot eastern diamondback coiled beneath a fallen log. The snake's diamond-patterned scales provided perfect camouflage among the dappled shadows, and its massive girth indicated this was a mature male in prime condition. Instead of using his snake hooks and restraint tubes as protocol demanded, Blackwood decided to capture the snake manually to obtain what he called more natural behavioral data. His dehydration and fatigue had impaired his judgment, making the dangerous decision seem reasonable. Blackwood crouched beside the coiled rattlesnake and slowly extended his hand toward the animal's neck, intending to grab it just behind the head in the classic restraint position. The snake remained motionless, its black eyes fixed on the approaching threat. Blackwood's hand moved closer, his fingers spread wide to ensure a secure grip on the thick neck. The eastern diamondback struck with lightning speed, its massive head snapping forward faster than the human eye could follow. Blackwood's reflexes, dulled by fatigue and dehydration, were no match for the snake's explosive attack. The rattlesnake's 2-inch fangs penetrated deep into Blackwood's wrist, injecting a medically significant dose of venom directly into his bloodstream. Blackwood jerked his hand back, but the damage was already done. The snake had delivered a high-volume envenomation, pumping a substantial amount of venom into Blackwood's circulatory system. Blackwood stared at the 2 puncture wounds on his wrist as blood began to flow, the venom's effects beginning to take hold. Over the next hour, Blackwood began experiencing progressive symptoms of severe envenomation. His wrist swelled gradually as the venom began destroying tissue at the bite site, while his blood's ability to clot became increasingly compromised. Blackwood attempted to walk back toward his vehicle, but the 3-mile journey through difficult terrain became increasingly difficult as the venom spread through his system. The hemotoxic venom attacked Blackwood's red blood cells and blood vessels, causing progressive coagulopathy that prevented normal clotting. After several hours of struggling through the swamp, Blackwood collapsed from shock and organ failure, his body overwhelmed by the systemic effects of the envenomation. Blackwood's university reported him missing when he failed to return from his research expedition. Park rangers found his body 2 days later, following the GPS coordinates from his research permit. The investigation revealed that Blackwood had violated multiple safety protocols by working alone without communication equipment and attempting to handle venomous snakes without proper restraint tools. The herpetology community was shocked by the loss of such an experienced researcher, but many colleagues noted that Blackwood's increasingly reckless behavior had made such a tragedy almost inevitable. His death led to stricter safety requirements for researchers working with venomous species in national parks. It was September 19th, 2014, and the humid evening air of Miami hung heavy with the promise of another tropical storm as residents of an apartment complex settled into their weekend routines. The 3-story building, home to young professionals and working families, buzzed with the sounds of televisions, conversations, and air conditioning units working overtime against the oppressive heat. In apartment 2B, Carlos Mendoza was preparing for what he hoped would be an impressive evening with a woman he had met at a local bar. Carlos Mendoza had been working construction in South Florida for 8 years, building a reputation as a reliable worker who wasn't afraid of dangerous jobs or long hours in challenging conditions. At 26, the Guatemalan native had established himself in Miami's competitive construction industry, but friends and co-workers later told investigators he had a habit of taking unnecessary risks, both at work and at home. 2 months earlier, during a construction project in Honduras, Carlos had encountered a local animal dealer who convinced him to purchase what the man described as an exotic but manageable pet snake. The dealer had downplayed the extreme danger of the fer de lance, describing it as just another tropical serpent that would make an impressive conversation piece for Carlos's Miami apartment. Carlos had successfully smuggled the highly venomous snake back to Florida, keeping it hidden in a converted aquarium in his bedroom closet. His knowledge of snake care came entirely from YouTube videos and online forums where he had absorbed dangerously incomplete information about handling venomous species. His 2 months of successful feeding had convinced him that the snake was as docile and manageable as the internet sources had suggested. According to the wildlife officer who examined the enclosure, the snake showed signs of chronic stress, including dehydration and poor muscle tone. The cramped aquarium lacked proper temperature and humidity, and investigators noted Carlos had been intermittently using a space heater and misting the tank, which kept the snake alive but highly stressed. Recent feedings showed persistent defensive behavior, leading specialists to conclude it had been increasingly reactive for weeks. Fer de lance snakes are among the most dangerous venomous serpents in the Western Hemisphere, responsible for more human fatalities than any other snake species in their native range. These aggressive pit vipers possess potent hemotoxic venom that can cause rapid tissue destruction, severe internal bleeding, and progressive circulatory failure. Adult specimens can reach lengths of over 6 feet and are documented as highly defensive when confined or stressed, especially in inadequate enclosures. Their heat-sensing capabilities and lightning-fast strike speed make them formidable predators that even experienced herpetologists handle with extreme caution. That evening, Carlos had been drinking beer while preparing his apartment for his date's arrival. His alcohol consumption had further impaired his already poor judgment regarding the dangerous animal he kept hidden in his bedroom. He decided that showing off his exotic pet would be the perfect way to impress his guest and demonstrate his adventurous nature. Carlos approached the enclosure with the same overconfidence he'd shown during feedings, unaware of how quickly a fer de lance can strike at close range. When Carlos reached into the enclosure, investigators later concluded, based on blood spatter on the tank's interior lip and the position of pooled blood near the enclosure, that the fer de lance struck at very close range. The 6-foot serpent delivered a significant unvenomation, supported by the rapid swelling documented at the scene and the depth of the wound noted in medical reports. The bite pattern and tissue damage indicated brief contact, a behavior herpetology consultant said is consistent with high-volume envenomation in stressed pit vipers. The potent hemotoxic venom caused rapid tissue damage at the bite site and early signs of circulatory instability, progressing quickly as his condition deteriorated. Carlos managed to call 911, but his deteriorating condition and panic made it impossible for him to coherently explain what had bitten him. According to the call transcript, the dispatcher struggled to interpret his fragmented phrases and slurred descriptions of the animal and his worsening condition. Paramedics arrived to find Carlos in severe shock, his arm grotesquely swollen and his vital signs rapidly declining. The fer-de-lance venom had caused severe internal bleeding and progressive circulatory failure that proved impossible to reverse. Carlos went into cardiac arrest during transport. Despite prolonged resuscitation attempts, he was pronounced dead later that night at the hospital. The discovery of the illegal fer-de-lance in Carlos's apartment prompted wildlife officers to add the incident to ongoing case files in South Florida. His death underscored how dangerous unregulated ownership of venomous wildlife can be, especially when the species involved is capable of delivering a fatal bite. It was October 18, 2018, near a research station outside Manaus, Brazil. Steady rain had left the forest floor wet and slippery, with mist clinging to the trees and rainfall masking distant sounds. Though the station looked calm, the flooded terrain was hazardous for anyone moving through it. Clara Fernandez was 27 years old and a herpetology student doing field research on venomous snakes. She shared a small cabin with 3 fellow students and spent most of her days cataloging species, measuring specimens, and recording behavior for her thesis. Clara was careful and detailed in her work, but she was known among her peers for taking calculated risks. She would work alone and sometimes remove gloves to get better touch observations. That morning, she planned to study a bushmaster near a flooded section of the forest, intending to record detailed behavior and habitat notes. She carefully packed her equipment: a handheld camera, field notebook, measuring tools, and her personal protective gear, leaving gloves aside for closer observations. By mid-morning, Clara had moved along narrow trails through dense vegetation. The forest floor was waterlogged, with mud pooling in low spots and small streams running unpredictably beneath her feet. Fallen leaves and submerged roots made footing uncertain. Birds were quiet, and insects were less active under the persistent rain. Clara noticed broken branches, disturbed leaves, and shallow depressions in the mud. These were signs that animals had recently moved through the area. She knew these were indications of nearby snakes, but felt confident in her knowledge and experience. Her peers had repeatedly warned her against entering flooded zones alone, particularly in areas known for bushmasters, but she believed she could manage a brief observation. The bushmaster is one of South America's largest vipers and can reach 10 feet long. Its venom is highly dangerous, capable of rapid bleeding throughout the body, tissue death, and low blood pressure. These snakes are ambush predators that generally avoid humans but will strike repeatedly if threatened. They are heavy-bodied and able to deliver precise, multiple strikes. They can adjust their position defensively when an intruder continues to bother them. Around 3:15 p.m., Clara reached a particularly flooded patch near a tributary. The water was murky, hiding roots and small drop-offs, and the mud was thick underfoot. She knelt at the edge of the water to examine tracks and take measurements. As she shifted her weight to steady herself, her foot slipped on a submerged root, causing her to stumble. In doing so, she accidentally disturbed a bushmaster hidden beneath leaf litter and shallow water. The snake reacted immediately, striking defensively. The first bite landed on her lower leg, puncturing the skin and causing sharp pain. Clara tried to step back, but the slippery, uneven terrain made it difficult to regain balance. Each movement sent vibrations through the water and mud, which the bushmaster perceived as continued threats. The snake struck again, biting her lower leg and calf in quick succession before recoiling into the leaf litter. While bushmasters do not squeeze like pythons, Clara's struggle in the mud and water slowed her movements and made retreat difficult. Her arms and hands disturbed floating debris and leaves, adding further stimuli, and her handheld camera and notebook fell into the water, partially submerged and catching glimpses of the tense scene. From a nearby tree platform, her fellow students could see splashes and floating items, but vegetation partially blocked their view of the snake. The encounter lasted only moments, but each bite injected venom, causing immediate local swelling and sharp pain. Clara focused on regaining her footing, the mud and water presenting almost as much danger as the snake itself. Clara was aware of the potential body-wide effects, including tissue death, low blood pressure, and blood clotting problems, but she had to first focus on moving through the flooded terrain while keeping herself upright. Field anti-venom kits were brought to the scene within 20 minutes. Clara received initial treatment from her peers while being prepared for evacuation. She was then airlifted to a hospital in Manaus, where doctors monitored her for body-wide poisoning. The bushmaster's venom had caused local tissue damage, swelling, and early signs of clotting disruption. Emergency care included giving anti-venom, pain management, and close monitoring of blood pressure. Over the following days, she underwent surgeries to remove dead tissue and prevent infection. Recovery required several months of physical therapy to restore movement and strength in her affected leg. The incident prompted a reassessment of fieldwork rules at the research station. Solo work in flooded areas was banned, and mandatory protective equipment, including gloves and stable footwear, was required. Equipment handling and communication rules were revised to ensure students remained in visual or radio contact at all times. Clara's partially recovered camera footage and field notes were preserved for research and safety training purposes. The incident showed how quickly a combination of environmental dangers, defensive animal behavior, and human error can escalate into a dangerous situation. Her movements, although instinctive, provoked a realistic defensive response from the bushmaster, highlighting the delicate balance between observation and safety in field research. By the end of the season, the research station had implemented stricter guidelines and incorporated the incident into safety briefings. Clara's experience became an example for new students of the importance of staying cautious, using protective equipment, and respecting both the environment and the animals being studied. Her careful documentation and survival reinforced the value of preparedness, emergency response, and measured risk-taking in the field. It was July 22, 2015, when the ancient city of Udaipur in Rajasthan, India, witnessed one of the most disturbing wildlife performance incidents ever recorded. The outdoor cultural performance ground, nestled between the majestic Aravalli Hills and Lake Pichola, had been transformed into an amphitheater for what was advertised as a traditional entertainment program. What the 200 spectators didn't realize was that they were about to witness an illegal demonstration that would end in tragedy. Drake Morgan, a 48-year-old American who claimed to be a professional snake whisperer, stood backstage preparing for his unauthorized demonstration. Unlike legitimate wildlife educators who maintain safe distances and use proper equipment, Drake had built his reputation on the dangerous claim that he could communicate with serpents through whispered commands and mystical movements. His performances operated in legal gray areas, often arranged through local intermediaries who bypassed bypassed official wildlife permits. Drake's controversial methodology centered on what he called serpentine telepathy, the belief that specific vocal frequencies and hand gestures could override a snake's natural defensive instincts. He had developed this technique over 15 years of increasingly risky performances across Southeast Asia, each success reinforcing his dangerous confidence. His social media following eagerly awaited footage of his most extreme demonstrations, creating financial pressure to push boundaries ever further. The American performer had arrived in India specifically seeking to work with the legendary Indian cobra, considered the holy grail among snake whisperers due to its lethal reputation and cultural significance. He had spent months networking through underground wildlife circles, eventually connecting with Rajesh Sharma, a local promoter who specialized in arranging illegal animal performances for foreign entertainers. Drake had arrived in Udaipur 3 days earlier through a network of promoters who specialized in underground wildlife entertainment. The cobra he would use had been captured days earlier from a village, but rather than being properly housed by wildlife authorities, it had been illegally obtained through corrupt local contacts who promised authentic, dangerous animals for foreign performers. This arrangement violated India's Wildlife Protection Act, which strictly prohibits the possession, display, or performance with protected wildlife, especially by foreigners. The event organizers had no proper documentation, relying instead on bribes and the assumption that a remote venue would avoid official scrutiny. The performance was marketed through private WhatsApp groups and word-of-mouth networks, attracting thrill-seekers, tourists, and locals curious about the mysterious American snake whisperer. The cobra had been housed in deplorable conditions, a cramped wooden box, fed irregularly, and subjected to constant stress. Wildlife experts would later testify that such treatment would have made the animal extremely unpredictable and aggressive. Security consisted of 2 local men with no wildlife training, armed only with long sticks and a fire extinguisher. The nearest hospital was 45 minutes away by car, and the venue had no emergency medical equipment beyond a basic first aid kit. As the evening program reached its climax, Drake emerged carrying a traditional wicker basket containing the mature Indian cobra. The 5-foot serpent was already agitated from days of improper captivity and transport stress. When Drake began his signature whispered incantations, experienced observers immediately noticed the cobra's fully extended hood and erratic movements, clear signs of extreme distress rather than the calm state Drake claimed to be inducing. Dr. Priya Mehta, a herpetologist from Udaipur University who had attended out of professional curiosity, later testified that the cobra displayed every warning sign of an animal in extreme defensive mode. The hood remained fully spread, the snake was making repeated false strikes, and its body posture indicated maximum agitation, she recalled. Drake, however, interpreted these warning signs as evidence that his technique was working. He announced to the crowd that the cobra was testing his spiritual connection and that the apparent agitation was actually the serpent's way of communicating its readiness to submit to his will. In his final demonstration, Drake made the decision that would prove fatal. Claiming his spiritual connection made protective equipment unnecessary, he approached the cobra and knelt within striking distance. The smartphone footage captured the moment when the highly agitated cobra, perceiving the close approach as a direct threat, struck with lightning speed. The cobra's fangs penetrated deep into Drake's exposed left ankle, delivering a substantial dose of neurotoxic venom. As Drake recoiled in shock, the chaos of the moment caused the cobra to make a second defensive movement. Though this strike missed, as handlers finally rushed to intervene, the Indian cobra's neurotoxic venom began its deadly work immediately. Within 10 to 15 minutes, Drake began showing the first signs of envenomation: ptosis, drooping eyelids, difficulty swallowing, and slurred speech. His desperate whispered commands to the cobra became increasingly garbled as the neurotoxins attacked the connections between his nerves and muscles. Over the next hour, as emergency responders struggled to transport him to the nearest hospital, Drake's condition steadily deteriorated. The progressive paralysis spread from the bite site throughout his body. His breathing became increasingly labored as the venom attacked his respiratory muscles. Despite reaching the hospital, the delay in receiving proper antivenom and the lack of immediate mechanical ventilation proved fatal. Drake died approximately 3 hours after the bite from respiratory failure. The medical team at Maharana Bhupal Government Hospital fought desperately to save Drake's life, but the combination of delayed treatment bite, and the substantial venom load proved insurmountable. Dr. Vikram Singh, the emergency physician who treated Drake, explained that cobra bite victims require immediate anti-venom and often mechanical ventilation to survive. Every minute of delay significantly reduces survival chances, he emphasized. The incident prompted an immediate crackdown by wildlife authorities, who arrested several local intermediaries involved in the illegal wildlife trade. The cultural venue was shut down pending investigation, and stricter enforcement of wildlife protection laws was implemented across Rajasthan. Multiple arrests followed as authorities traced the network of corruption that had enabled the illegal performance. Rajesh Sharma was sentenced to 3 years in prison for wildlife trafficking and culpable homicide. The incident sparked nationwide discussions about the exploitation of wildlife for entertainment and led to enhanced penalties for violations of the Wildlife Protection Act. Drake Morgan's death exposed the dangerous myth that venomous snakes could be controlled through mystical means, while highlighting the ongoing problem of illegal wildlife exploitation in India's underground entertainment industry. It was March 8, 2017, and the suburban neighborhoods of Phoenix, Arizona basked under the desert sun as Bobby Chen worked in his converted garage laboratory. The 34-year-old software engineer had transformed the space into an elaborate reptile facility, complete with custom-built enclosures and climate control systems that housed his secret collection of exotic venomous snakes. Bobby had been illegally importing venomous species for 3 years, building a collection that included 12 different species from around the world. His neighbors had no idea that deadly serpents lived just feet from their own homes, as Bobby had carefully concealed his hobby behind the facade of a normal suburban lifestyle. He had learned everything about snake care from online videos and forums, never receiving formal training in handling venomous species. Bobby worked as a senior developer for a major tech company, earning a substantial salary that funded his expensive and dangerous hobby. He had started with harmless species before gradually acquiring more dangerous specimens through underground networks and illegal wildlife dealers. His garage had been meticulously converted with temperature controls, humidity systems, and specialized lighting to accommodate species from tropical climates. His prize specimen was a massive gaboon viper from West Africa, a snake he had acquired through illegal wildlife trafficking networks. The snake lived in a custom enclosure that Bobby had built himself, though the habitat was inadequate for such a dangerous animal. Bobby's lack of proper training and equipment had created a disaster waiting to happen, and his habit of drinking beer while performing routine maintenance on his collection would prove fatal. Gaboon vipers are among the world's most dangerous snakes, possessing the longest fangs of any venomous species at up to 2 inches in length. They can inject massive amounts of venom in a single bite, with their cytotoxic poison causing severe tissue death and organ failure. Gaboon vipers are ambush predators with incredible striking speed despite their heavy build, and their excellent camouflage makes them nearly invisible when motionless. Their venom is associated with high mortality without rapid anti-venom administration. Bobby had been drinking beer while cleaning multiple snake enclosures, a routine he performed every weekend to maintain his collection. The alcohol had impaired his judgment and slowed his reflexes, making him careless around animals that demanded absolute precision and respect. When he reached the gaboon viper's enclosure, Bobby made the fatal decision to clean the habitat while the snake was still inside. Bobby opened the enclosure door and reached inside with his cleaning tools, believing the snake was docile enough to allow his presence. The gaboon viper lay coiled in the corner of its enclosure, perfectly camouflaged among the artificial plants and substrate, displaying the natural defensive behavior that made these serpents such effective ambush predators. The moment Bobby's hand entered the enclosure, the gaboon viper struck with devastating speed in a defensive response to the perceived threat. Its massive head shot forward, and the 2-inch fangs penetrated deep into Bobby's forearm, injecting an enormous dose of cytotoxic venom. Bobby screamed and jerked his arm back, but the snake had already delivered what would prove to be a fatal envenomation. Bobby immediately called 911, but his location in suburban Phoenix presented a unique problem. Identifying the exact species and locating appropriate antivenom would prove logistically complex and time-consuming. The exotic nature of his collection meant that standard snakebite protocols required modification, as emergency rooms needed to identify the specific species before determining treatment options. The gaboon viper venom began its devastating work immediately, causing massive tissue death at the bite site, while simultaneously attacking Bobby's internal organs. His forearm swelled to twice its normal size as the cytotoxic poison destroyed muscle, fat, and blood vessels. The venom's hemotoxic components began breaking down his blood cells, causing progressive bleeding throughout his body. Emergency medical personnel arrived within minutes and immediately began providing airway support, intravenous fluids, pain control, and continuous monitoring of Bobby's vital signs. They worked to stabilize his condition while frantically coordinating with poison control centers and herpetologists to identify the exact species and locate appropriate antivenom. Bobby was rushed to the nearest trauma center, where doctors continued supportive care while the antivenom was being located and transported. The delay in obtaining the specific antivenom, combined with the massive dose of venom Bobby had received, created a race against time that medical personnel ultimately could not win. Bobby died from hemorrhagic shock and multiple organ failure 36 hours after the bite, his body overwhelmed by the massive dose of exotic venom despite aggressive medical intervention. Police discovered his illegal collection during the investigation, finding 11 other venomous snakes in various stages of poor health. Bobby's death shocked his family and neighbors, who had no idea about his dangerous hobby. The case led to stricter enforcement of exotic animal laws and enhanced training for emergency responders dealing with unusual envenomation. His death also prompted hospitals in areas with known exotic pet ownership to develop better protocols for identifying and treating non-native snake envenomations. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.